Developmental trauma very often leads into issues in later relationships in our lives. And whether it's trauma or certainly how we are in relationship as a child impacts on how we will be in relationship in later life, for sure. That's not new. There's a plethora of psychological, neurodevelopmental research on that for decades. Attachment theory, the work of Bowlby, particularly in the 50s, looked at attachment styles: secure, more anxious style, more avoidant style, and more ambivalent or disorganized styles, and how they show up. How the parents are, even in utero with that child, whether there is security for the fetus while it's in utero, what's happening to cortisol levels within the mother, how the mother is, all of these things can actually have an impact on the child even before it's born. And of course, this is where the generational stuff comes in, that our parents become parents based on their childhood experience, which is based on their childhood experience. Very often I find that people will either replicate what they had or go the polar opposite to compensate and say, well, I'm not doing that because I didn't have that, and so I'm going to do this instead, sometimes to a healthy level, sometimes to a polar extreme, that then means that they don't have any boundaries because they had excessive boundaries, for example, meaning that then means that creates other problems for their own children, because children need boundaries. And so there are so many ways in which this can play out. How, if our emotional, let's look at the emotional piece for a moment, commonly healthy aggression or anger in times gone by, or how people cry, and whether you're a boy or a girl, and big boys don't cry, and all of this silly nonsense that went on in former generations, or punishment, punitive things, boys crying and being hit, I'll give you something to cry about, all of this horrific stuff that happens. Certainly happened more in the past, but certainly still happens now. These things can then lead to distortions of how the human, the person, develops. And then they'll get these, what in psychotherapeutic terms is called transference. So you get those moments where, if you're in relationship with your partner and there are mild irritations and you think, oh, goodness. And then there are those ones that feel like someone's just lit the blue touch paper, and we get a very strong kind of flary type response. Usually that's an activation. They've hit something from the past. It's sort of, there's an echo of the past that then has just gone, oh, there's that again, there's that tone of voice, there's that feeling that I was made to feel when I was small, and then we'll either recoil against that, protect against that, defend against that, push back against that, and it leads to arguments in our adult relationships. And that really is transferential, and that is an echo of the past. And so this is one example of how these things show up for us based on our development. The vast majority of these things do begin in our early years and are developmental. Why? Well, a colleague in the past said to me, why do so many issues begin in childhood? And joked about it. And I said, well, that's because where our nervous system's developing. And that's how our patterns of how we relate to one another, how we deal with anger, how we, or not, more importantly, if when we are not allowed to have anger, a temper tantrum in a 2-year-old is meant to happen because they're not developed enough to be able to discern, they are pretty narcissistic, that's what babies are, and they're going, I don't care about dinner, I want this biscuit, and they're going to just get frustrated, and they're going to be able to, but at that point they act it out, they demonstrate it because they don't have the other language. So how they communicate that is by acting it. They get frustrated and it bursts out and they act it out. But if there are punitive measures around anger, then that will often then say, well, okay, parents are right, I'm a tiny child and I keep getting told or hit or told I mustn't be angry, but but I do have this experience, and so as this experience comes up, then there must be something wrong with me because I'm experiencing it and I'm being told that I mustn't have it. And so then it often transmutes on the way up and turns into shame. And that is an overcoupling and a distortion that I see all the time. It's one of the most common distortions around anger and shame. And so every time we then experience something which angers us, and angers, by the way, are important for boundaries because it's our ability to say no. And in the words of Gabor Mate, when you can't say no, the body says no. So if we can't have a no, then our boundary, our edge, it isn't there. So we'll feel constant invasion, which will then lead us to bracing, protecting, avoidance strategies, and all of the physiological and health consequences which come from that. Which is why we can't separate mind and body. We really can't. And the developmental piece, and why adverse childhood events and things like that lead to these pathologies in later life. So how we cope with anger, how we deal with those scary moments where parents don't feel like caregivers or they're not parenting particularly effectively or very well, will lead to us having health problems and relational problems as adults. Hi, I'm Roger. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons.